You're back. Fantastic. Good to see you all. Thanks for coming and taking a listen to me as I explain a little bit about the geography of the United States. This is our third lesson in U.S. history, and we're going to start to focus on the actual United States itself. We've looked at kind of an introduction lesson, then we've talked a little bit about history. Now we're getting on to the U.S. But before we get into the history of the U.S., we need to talk about the physical and cultural playing field that the United States occupies, and that is a study called geography. So we're going to look a little bit about how geography impacts history, and specifically how it impacted the history of the U.S. Well, here's a map of the United States. This should look somewhat familiar to you. This is called a political map, in that it is divided up into the individual states and has their capitals. Now, as we know, when we fly over the United States, there's not these lovely colors and nice easy borders and things like that. This is a political manifestation of what we wanted to do. And some of the things that we can tell about the United States is if we looked on the east, or the right-hand side of the map, the states are very small. And as we start to go to the west, or heading left, the states get larger. There's a reason for that. One is that is the direction of settlement, and also it has to do with population. When these states all came into being, the East Coast states were smaller but heavily populated, and the ones further west were larger and sparsely populated. Now, sometimes that's changed recently, but that kind of held true. Another thing you'll see as we look at the West Coast states is they all tend to be nice right angles and straight lines. That's because we didn't know an awful lot about the area that we were making a state when we made them way back in the 18 or early 1900s. So geography has a play in what our map looks like of the U.S. Now here's a physical map of the United States. So same land, just different map. And this, of course, is looking at the physical features. You can see that the dark shaded areas are mountains. We have a major mountain range that runs along the East Coast called the Appalachian Mountains. And then the entire west of the United States is mountainous. We have the Rocky Mountains, we have the Cascade Mountains, we have the Sierra Nevada Mountains, we have the Wasatch Range, we have a number of different mountain ranges. And right smack in the middle is this huge blue line, or a series of blue lines, the major of which is the Mississippi River, which drains all that center point. A couple other really important geographical distinctions is we are bordered by three major bodies of water. We have the Atlantic Ocean on the right, or east. We have the Gulf of Mexico on the south, and we have the Pacific Ocean on the west. And one of the other things that we need to understand is we have the Great Lakes, these huge glacially carved lakes right smack dab in the middle of the country. So all those physical features are now going to impact the way people move, the way people settle, and where those people can settle. One of the things the United States is very lucky in is that it is abundant in natural resources. Lots and lots of countries would love to have what we have. Now, right now we talk about the fact that we import lots and lots of oil from the Middle East, but on the overall, we do really, really well in terms of our natural resources, which has allowed us to become a powerful nation. Without these natural resources, we would not have been able to be as powerful as we are. So we have, lots and lots of water in the United States. Now, we, of course, in southern Nevada recognize that we may have lots of water around the entire United States, but there are certain areas of the United States that don't have enough water, and Las Vegas is certainly one of those. We have petroleum. Alaska has lots of petroleum. Texas has lots of petroleum. Certainly not enough for the entire country, but we have lots of it. We have minerals like gold and silver in our own state, timber in the Northwest, and very verdant soil, especially in the middle part of our country where we grow lots and lots of crops. And if we think about the United States, we can actually divide it up into regions. And regions are divided up based on a couple of different factors. One is going to be the physical geography of where they are, how it looks, what the vegetation is like, those type of things. And another is going to be the cultural geography, what people are like. When we think of the South, if you think about that for just a second, you probably have an image of what people are like there. Maybe a little bit about how they talk, maybe a little bit about what they eat, a number of different things. Same thing with if you say the Midwest, you might have an image of what we're talking about in terms of a culture. What are the people like, how do they exist, etc. So we're going to look a little bit about the regions of the U.S. and go over some of the major pieces that happen in each one. We'll start off with the Northeast. This was one of the first areas to be colonized by Europe and has some of our major population centers. So let's take a look at this particular part of the world. This is blue on your map in the upper right-hand corner. It's small but big in population. So small in size, big in population. Lots and lots of people live in the Northeast. It has a high population density, and what that means is it has lots of people in a small amount of area. So California, for example, has a lot of people, but it's a big state, so it has low population density. But the state of Massachusetts has a high population and a very small area, which means it has high population density. There's what's called a megalopolis, or a massive city that's in the Northeast, called Bowash, which means that all the way from Boston to Washington, D.C. is kind of one long city. It's the financial and trade center of our country. There's no question about it, centered on New York. And the big cities in the Northeast are New York, Boston, and Pittsburgh would be another example. Moving to the South, South is primarily rural, which means people live outside of major cities, although that's changing. We have some major cities in the South for sure, and relies on agriculture. Agriculture, the growing of things, is really, really big in the South. We have an increase in population in the South, however, that's been going on for about the last 20 years, especially of people that are retired. People that lived in the Northeast, maybe, lived in New York City or in Boston, but got tired of those cold winters. They moved to Florida. You may have some relatives that live in Florida. That's a classic place to retire. But all of the South, and what's called the Sun Belt, is an area where people are moving. It also is a very diverse population. It has the largest percentage of African Americans of any of these regions. And some of the major cities in this part of the world, or this part of the country, would be Washington, D.C., our national capital, Atlanta, New Orleans, Houston, and Miami. Moving on to the Midwest, that's the green, right in the center of the United States. That is what's called the breadbasket, or the place where a vast majority of the agriculture is grown for the nation. Corn and wheat and soy and some of these huge products that are used to make the food that the United States relies on comes from the Midwest. It also, especially in the old part of the Midwest, is the industrial hub, the center point of manufacturing. Places like Detroit, where they built cars up until recently, and Ohio as a state is very, very industrial. We do a lot of mining and manufacturing in this part of the country, and it can be very severe in terms of its weather. If you've ever been to Chicago or Detroit or Milwaukee in the winter, you know it is not a pleasant place. Chicago, Minneapolis, St. Louis, and Detroit would be some examples of cities in this region. The West is where we live, lowest population density of all the regions. It's a huge area, certainly the largest when you factor in Alaska in terms of land mass of any of the regions, but it has a small percentage of population that live there. There's lots of wide open spaces. It also is very recent geologically. It's the most new area in geologic terms, and of course when we're talking there, we're talking hundreds of thousands or millions of years, but it's very new. Lots of volcanics, lots of earthquakes as the earth is still struggling and moving. We see mining, ranching, and a lot of recreation happening in this region of the United States, and large population increases over the last 50 years where people ran to the West Coast because of the good weather and the jobs. Los Angeles, Seattle, our very own Las Vegas, Denver, and Phoenix would be some examples of cities in this region. Demographics. The idea of demographics is where do people live? And if we think about the United States and we look at it in terms of where people live, here's what it looks like. So the darker the color, the more people live. And this is divided up. Every one of these little squares is a county in the United States. So you can see that the vast majority of the population lives in the east, that we have a fair amount of population along the west coast, but very little in the Intermountain West. If you look at where Nevada is, except for Clark County, there's not a lot going on. So this gives you an idea of where the people live, and a lot of that has to do with geography. There's not a lot of water, there's not a lot of resources in some of these places in the West.